And he asked if I wanted to have everybody step out, and I said no. Whatever you have to say, I want everybody to hear it. And he said, I just don't think she's gonna make it. I just don't think she's gonna make it. Her tissue's too soft. And I know at that moment he kept talking, but I couldn't hear him. After those words, I couldn't hear him. Before she was born, we knew there were going to be issues. An anatomy scan, our normal anatomy scan halfway through the pregnancy showed they could not find but one kidney. And that was kind of all the doctors told me that first ultrasound, but they said, we want to see you back in a month. We went back in a month and found out they couldn't find her heart on the ultrasound. But she was moving. She was alive. Obviously there was a heart somewhere. So they sent us from here in Burlington to Duke Perinatal Clinic. And the roller coaster really started then.
Can you wave at them? Hey, Sissy.
Email a video to them.
I'm trying to eat my fingers.
And it was test after test after test. And anyway, they monitor her through ultrasound and fetal distress monitors constantly. And then once it was time for her to get here, things were a lot different than what anybody expected. She came out by cesarean and looked completely normal. She looked healthy. She was crying. It was quiet, but she was crying. They took her away. I didn't get to see her for at least the first 12 hours. There was a nurse that day that even made the comment she didn't know why Peyton was in PICU because she was doing so well. And then a couple hours later, that same nurse tried to feed her a bottle. And when she did that, milk started pouring out of Peyton's nose, her mouth. She was gagging, her sats were dropping. So they immediately start running all these different tests, and come to find out Peyton has what you call esophageal atresia.
Now, esophageal atresia is a relatively uncommon problem. It only occurs in 1 in 3,000 to 5,000 pregnancies, so most people don't know a lot about it. When you think about the esophagus, you think about swallowing, going from your mouth to your stomach. Esophageal atresia is when that tube doesn't develop correctly. And pure esophageal atresia, or so-called long gap esophageal atresia, you may see the terms LGEA for long gap esophageal atresia, really refers to these. And this is where the bottom part of the esophagus, this part, never connected up to the trachea. There's no fistula up here for the bottom segment. So you have a much shorter portion of distal esophagus, which only goes from here to here, as opposed to this part, which goes from here to here. And what we are left with is a gap here, which is relatively long, and that's where the long gap comes from. So in long gap esophageal atresia, this part can be of different lengths. This is not a simple problem, but has multiple variants which can be progressively complex.
That was just the beginning of everything. There was echocardiograms to check out the heart. It was on the right side of her chest instead of the left. But it appeared to be that everything worked like it was supposed to. They looked at, let's see, the heart, the esophagus. They checked to make sure there was no kidney. There was still no kidney there. It never formed. And then at 2 days old, she developed a blood clot in her liver. And those were pretty scary words. But it was just like snowballing. So she went in at 2 days old for her first surgery. And it was tough.
She's saying, please let me go to sleep.
I told her, I don't blame you, Peyton. I would too. Embarrassing. Yeah.
They never made it sound like there wasn't hope going into the surgery. But when it was about 8 o'clock at night and we hadn't heard anything, she was still in surgery. My hospital room was full of family waiting to find out how she was doing. And the surgeon walked in and he said, "I just don't think she's gonna make it." That was the toughest day of our lives.
She's gonna play peekaboo by herself. Peyton.
Her tissue was just so soft, and her anatomy so different. There's so many things about her little body that are so different. But he didn't give up. He couldn't do it, but he found somebody in Boston that could. So on January 9th, Peyton and I got on a medical jet. She was in this little pod. She looked like a little spaceship, a little alien in a spaceship. And they sent her to Boston. Peyton, go in there.
You're broken down and tired of living life on the merry-go-round. And you can't find a fighter, but I see it in you, so we gon' walk it out. Ooh.
But many surgeries and many months went by. It seemed like we were headed in the right direction. They would say, next time we're going to get her esophagus connected. She's going to come off that breathing tube really easy. She never came off that breathing tube easy. It was always a struggle. And I would watch other babies in that NICU that had the exact same surgery. And that day, they were back to breathing on their own. They were doing great, but Peyton, every time, it was like she just couldn't breathe without the ventilator. She just needed the help. So I think it took, I would have to look back, but I think it took something like 15 surgeries on her esophagus to get her connected. And what they did was made little incisions in her back. They had suture lines attached to her top esophagus and her bottom esophagus. And they would tighten those strings every day, and it would make esophagus grow.
And so in the simplest terms, all we do is apply a couple of sutures on the end of this esophagus and pull this way. It's not something inside the lumen. It's not inside the esophagus. These sutures are on the outside. And we do the same thing down here. We pull this way. A couple of sutures, usually 4 total, and they pull that way. And over time, these ends get closer and closer together.
And I do it 1,000 times again.
She would be paralyzed for weeks at a time, and that was just horrible. But on June 28th, 2012, she finally got her esophagus. We came home October 8th, 2012, so she spent a total of 9 months there. Once we came back to Duke, eventually they got her out on the floor, and we started talking about going home. They were telling me, you're going home. We're looking at about 10 days away. And of course I was with Peyton night and day out on the floor in her room. And she had an episode where her oxygen dropped down. I believe it was in the 60s. That night, they called a code blue. Doctors, nurses, respiratory therapists, everybody came running, and she was rushed straight to PICU again. And that's when they decided to call in Dr. Epen, Dr. Rose Epen at Duke. She's an ENT. And she wanted to run some tests. She came in and ran a scope down Peyton's bronchial tubes and everything. And it was found that Peyton's vocal cords were paralyzed. That she was not going to be able to eat. Might not be able to talk or cry that well. And she was very high risk for aspiration pneumonia. So that day she told me Peyton needed a trach. She got in on November 2nd of 2012. And then we had weeks of recovering and learning. We had to learn about changing out trachs and what to do in an emergency and so much equipment. And finally on December 26th, she was able to come home for the first time.
Sure by now, God, you would have reached down and wiped out.
I do remember after that first surgery, I thought I'm going to
stepped in and saved the day.
But my faith came in, and God told me she wasn't going to do it. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be a long, tough road, but she's going to make it. And when she got home that day, all I could do was praise God. So without my faith in Jesus and my faith in God, there's no way that I could have done this. I could have gave up a long time ago. Without knowing what He's done for me. There were times when I would get down and think I'm being punished, or Peyton's being punished because of my actions. And I would open the Bible and see a verse that says, oh no, that's not how this works. So I remember growing up, Daddy always telling me that our children don't really belong to us. Our children are on loan to us from God. They belong to Him. And I thought about that after that doctor told me Peyton wasn't going to make it. And with every bit of faith in me, I prayed that night that He said she wasn't going to make it. And I said, God, if you want her back, she's yours. I'll be thankful for the time that I have. But I know she belongs to you. I hope I get to keep her longer. I hope you loan her to me longer. But if you need her back, I understand. And that's something, even today, almost 7 years later, I think about. She's had a tough life, but if God called her home today, I would be okay and thankful for what time I've had with her. But the faith, without it, like I say, we would be nowhere. We wouldn't have the support that we've had and how things just came together. There's no way that without God these things didn't happen.
I'm eating me a Hot Pocket.
Okay.
Hey, you can't have a Hot Pocket.
Hey.
My biggest piece of advice is don't give up. Don't give up. The doctors say they can't do it. That your kid's not going to walk. Your kid's not going to eat. Your kid's not going to survive this next surgery. Don't believe that. Have faith and don't give up and keep fighting for that child because they can overcome odds.